Hello, this is Claus Jensen presenting my most recent game on chess.com. My opponent in this game is actually the very same who was black in another of my videos, the video titled Dark Square Weaknesses, but more on that later. On chess.com I'm currently rated 2400 and my opponent in this game is rated around 2200. And the game started e4, c5, knight f3, e6, the Taimanov variation, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6. And this is actually exactly the same opening moves as in my other video, the Dark Square Weaknesses video. And in that game I exchanged on c6 immediately, and after b takes c6 the game continued, bishop d3, knight f6, knight c3, bishop b4, e5, knight d5, queen g4, g6, castles, and then my opponent decided to exchange on c3, leaving him with severe dark square weaknesses around his king. And the video on this game is available from my YouTube channel and also from my blog. But back to this game, where I didn't exchange on c6, I played knight c3 instead. And then came a6, which is known as the Khan variation of the Sicilian. Bishop e2, knight f6, and only now I decided to exchange on c6. Knight takes c6, b takes c6, e5, knight d5, and knight e4. And I've played similar systems like this many times with white pieces, and I believe black's position is very difficult to handle because his position is cramped in the center. In particular, the d6 square is of great importance. Bishop e7, castles, and c4, sorry. And an option for black here is to play knight c7, and then after bishop e3, planning to pin the knight to the queen, knight e8 and f4. Then white is having a big space advantage, and the black position is not that easy to play. And I think best would probably be to try to free up the position immediately with the d5. And after c takes, e takes, knight c5. Black has some weaknesses, the pawns on the queen side, a6 and c6, but he also has better chances of having his pieces to help him defend against a possible kingside attack from white. So all the black pieces are almost in a position where it can help their king. So this is playable for black, but I still think white is having a better position. But instead of knight c7, my opponent played f5, and after c takes d5, f takes e4, and d6. The center is now static, and bishop g5 followed, and queen a4, of course, planning to take the pawn on e4. My opponent exchanged bishops on c1, and now we have a position which is in fact an excellent example of the very useful advice that if you don't have a clear plan, you can always start improving the position of your worst placed piece. And this piece of advice should make it very easy for black to find the right plan in this position, because there's no doubt that the worst placed piece in the black position is this bishop. It cannot develop because the central pawns are blocking, and the only way it can develop is to b7, but then it would block the b file and still would have to play c5 to open this diagonal. So probably the best thing for black to do is to develop this bishop to a6, because from a6 it would have this nice diagonal, and perhaps even be able to exchange the bishops, which would be in favor of black, because the white bishop is much better than the black bishop. So, considering all this, it's obvious that the best move in this position is a5, making space for this bishop a6, which would be the best plan in this position. But my opponent instead played queen b6. I took the pawn on e4. And again, I think the best plan is a5 followed by bishop a6. But my opponent starts grabbing a pawn. Apparently, he's completely unaware of the upcoming attack on the king side. So queen takes b2 was played here. And bishop d3, a simple threat on h7, g6 to block this threat. And it's clear now that the black king is pretty much left alone. The only piece to assist their majesty in defense is the rook on f8. And had I now played rook c2 here, then their queen would also not be able to help in defense. But instead I played the inaccurate h4. And now it's vital for black to play queen d2 with the idea of queen h6 and queen g7 to help defend their king. I could play f4 to block this retreat from the black queen, but then a5, h5 and bishop a6 would remove an important attacker, my bishop on d3, and this would be playable for black at least. But instead of queen d2, my opponent played queen takes a2, and I think this is almost the mistake of a beginner, I would say, because black completely ignores the attack and just grabs another pawn. But I don't mind being a pawn or two or even 3 pawns down in the end, as long as my opponent's king is checkmate. So I continue the attack h5, queen d5, and of course it's out of the question to exchange queens here. Queen e3, king g7, h takes, and if h takes g6, then queen g3 attacking g6, and the only way to protect it is to sack the exchange. Rook f5, bishop takes, e takes, queen g5, and if black takes the pawn on e5, then rook f to e1 would open up for the rook going to e7, and again we can see that the two pieces on a8 and c8 are not helping their king at all. They are passively placed in the corner, and this would be decisive. A mate would follow in a very few moves. So instead of h takes g6, my opponent played h6, and then I was planning to play my rook to the king side, so rook c4, bishop b7. 7 is starting a plan of a few desperate tricks on g2. I play my rook to h4, rook h8 to defend the pawn on h6, king h2. Plan here is to double the rooks in the h file, a5, rook h1, c5, and now there's a mate on g2. So first I have to play f3, queen a2, king g3. Now there's a threat on h6 again, h5, rook takes, c4, rook h7 check. And in this position, my opponent resigned the game in view of the upcoming mate. For example, rook takes, king g8, and queen h6, followed by queen g7, checkmate. So, I think there are some lessons to learn from this game. The first lesson to learn is it's almost always a good plan to improve the position of your worst placed piece. In this case, it was the bishop on c8, which was not developed properly. 2. Always carefully evaluate if your king needs additional protection before considering taking pawns on the other side of the board. It's of course much more important to defend your king than it is to grab a pawn or two on the other side of the board. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you on my blog at klausjensen.com. Bye bye for now.